Hello everybody, welcome to Red Tool House. I'm Troy. One of the topics we like to cover on our channel is the discussion of land. And that can be anything from looking for land, purchasing land, and managing or improving land through the lens of either farming or homesteading. And on today's video, I want to take you guys on a little ride with us because recently Kelly and I were asked to travel to a viewer's property, recently purchased property, and basically do an assessment how we would use this large tract of land to set up a homestead slash farm. So we went down, took a tour with the property owner. I took a lot of video, and then I came back and I wrote a 16-page assessment with recommendations. I want to share that with you all because I think, A, it may spark some ideas in your mind of what you could do on your property, or maybe if you're still looking for land, things to consider as you're making those observations. So come along. We are in, did you say Southeast Kentucky?
Southeast Kentucky.
Southeast Kentucky with Alan on his 170 acres.
Yes.
170 acres in Southeast Kentucky, and it is some gorgeous land. And we're looking at it not because he wants to sell it or anything, so y'all just calm down. We're looking at it and we're talking plans, we're talking big vision here. And so he invited Kelly and I to come down and we're just going to ruminate on some stuff today about all the potentials of this beautiful land. So I'm going to share it with you guys and give you some insight of what we're looking at. So last month, Kelly and I were invited down for a day-long tour, and it was a beautiful old farm that the meadows were still maintained due to other people cutting hay. But other than that, it was mostly abandoned on the 170 acres, except for a small house that was built on the very front of the property. It was a new structure, and there's a lot of history as to why it was done that way, and we're not going to get into this video. See, on the west side of the property is a deeded easement. So from the county road to the actual property itself, there's about a 50-yard deeded easement there that would allow the homeowner, the property owner, to gain access. So the first thing that I felt was important to do in a property assessment, of course, was to talk to the property owners. And we spent most of the time with Alan. He is the father and husband in the family. So Alan, Kelly, and I kind of rode around on a side-by-side looking at the property and him explaining some of his goals. So that was factored into the assessment, because I can't come down and say, well, I think you ought to do this, this, and this if it's not congruent with the property owner's goal. So here were some of the goals that he wanted to achieve with his property, and some of the things he wanted to maintain or to change. So first and foremost, the land would be used as a primary residency for he and his family. He was not going to be an absentee landowner. He was not going to reside elsewhere. In fact, he's already residing on the property in that small home on the front. The land would be used to produce a large percentage of food for his family. Now, he wants to be able to take advantage of the resources and build experience in providing his own food, whether it's protein, whether it's vegetable, perennial, all of that type of stuff. Number three, really important to he and his family, was the seclusion, so the privacy this property offered. And it was pretty rural. And as we get into discussing the topography here soon, you'll see how that really plays into his plans as well. Number four, they're looking at the land actually producing an income. Now, both he and his wife have remote jobs, which is extremely handy, of course, to be that rural. But they want to look at the land as an opportunity to provide more resources, more income, so they can sustain that homestead-style life. And one is an interest in boarding horses or even doing short-term rental like Airbnb. Now, Alan was agreeable to doing some land alterations, but we didn't want to do this huge wholesale change. We didn't want to change the personality of the land. So one of the restrictions were he did not want to do any commercial timbering. There's a section on the eastern ridge, and we'll get to that here in a second, that he wanted to keep as undisturbed as possible. So that's kind of a sacred area that we're not going to touch. And he also wanted to maintain and establish more trail systems on the property. Up around the house, there was already a nice trail system for side-by-side for the horses that they have, or to be a good walking path. Well, he wanted to expand that resource across the whole 170 acres. So with those parameters in mind, here's what we got into. So what I wanted to do first and foremost was break the property into zones based upon the conversation I had with Alan, his goals, and then what we were able to see. So I made 3 key zones here that you'll see in the map. The westernmost portion of the property is what I call the tourism zone. This is where the existing house is. It's a modest house, and it was built for a recreation opportunity for the previous owners. So it's very nice, very well built, but just small. And it has close proximity to the road, so it's almost visible from the road. Still have some privacy. But this is the area that if they did any Airbnb stuff, they would utilize that house in the existing space up on top. Now, for those of you that don't understand Appalachian topography, and especially that of that portion of Kentucky, you have this area of ridge and valley. So the tourism zone is actually up on ridge. So everything that's highlighted is about 100 to 150 feet higher in elevation than the area that we're calling the Homestead zone. That's down in a valley where the main watershed is, where all the meadows are. And then the eastern portion of the property is that portion that we've referred to as the sacred area, or the eastern ridge zone. So those three locations, we did assessments for each of those 3 based upon Alan's goals and what he wanted to see the property perform. So we started down in the Homestead zone because that's where the rubber meets the road, right? That's where he's going to live. So the challenge Alan's facing, of course, is the house and all the infrastructure is way back up there. But this is just incredible, incredible farmland. This was, at one time, as you can tell, was a pretty happening farm. The old barn site was right here behind the side-by-side. And yes, we are riding around in a Polaris all day today. That's the only downside of today. He's going to watch this and hear me say that. But you can see behind us here all the way, there's a meadow here, meadow to the right side of the creek, and then there's even another one back that is all part of his property. And then the meadow's going this way. And what's really great about this land is this is south facing. So the sun, the southern sun in the wintertime is going to shoot right up this valley. So we're looking at places to maybe, he's thinking about building an off-grid house in the future, in the near future, and that'll allow him to get away from the main road area and get right in the dead center of the property and be able to be that secluded, be totally off-grid, so he's not investing a ton of money in infrastructure as far as running power and water down here. A decent stream that runs through, actually a really good sized watershed that runs through that leads us to believe there's going to be great groundwater and well water opportunities. In fact, the old farmhouse that's set beside the barn, there's a hand-dug well that's been covered up. Well, one of the first key points that Alan wanted to make was where he wanted to locate his house. And we've got that location marked by the house meadow. It's why it was called that, because that's the meadow where the house is to be built. So it's tucked up into this little watershed, that the watershed faces east. There were some pros and cons of that location from my assessment, and Alan's aware of those, and he has taken those into consideration. To me, the biggest con was the simple fact that it's not south facing, and there's a ridgeline that will block south. So he's going to lose the opportunity to do any passive solar with his house construction. Now, he can still do solar, he just has to move his panels out further out in the meadow. So where we're standing here, Alan is showing us this little alcove here, this little tucked away spot is where he'd like to put his off-grid house, and really like the focus on this because it's going to allow him to be tucked away, and he's going to have, turn around here 180 degrees, he's going to have commanding view of most of his production meadows here, and then of course they go further that way to the north. The only downside to what we're talking about is with solar and being south facing, his solar is going to have to move out a little further here. But taking that trade to say, well, yeah, let's move solar out, have a little bit more wiring, bringing that power in exchange for being kind of tucked away in this cool area. In fact, what's going to be neat is the fact that this is going to be west, so he's going to get natural cooling in this valley, because this valley is not going to heat up. It's a pretty steep little ravine. It's not going to heat up, and it's going to have, in the summertime, that cold air is going to come pumping out through there. So if he builds a house, shotgun style house, where you got front door, back door, open up that door and get some natural cooling there and save him electricity and juice on running any type of AC or mini split. And there's even a watershed, so of course that watershed is going to produce a cooling effect as well. It's a really neat place to tuck one in. And then when it comes to zone 1 for gardening and those type of things, and chickens, has this whole area out front here, and then has this opportunity to clear out some of the scrub. So he comes in, gets this underbrush cleared out, which probably be a pig thing, I would think.
Yeah.
Some pigs in here, get that opened up a little bit, and then he can start putting chickens in this area. Maybe some, his egg layers there, or even go mobile with that. But in his bottomland here, just tons and tons of space to run chicken tractors for producing his own poultry. He's not looking to do commercial sales of any of this, just looking at producing for his wife and 2.5 kids. He's got one on the way. It's still in the oven. So he's a family of 5 real soon, but looking at having this opportunity to raise a lot of his own food here in the zone 1 area, and then horse and maybe cattle production and hay production further out. With the horses, of course, good quality pasture, not only for them to be on, but good quality pasture to cut for hay. So he can really dodge a lot of costs in the wintertime for that. Okay, as with any project, any property assessment, and again, embracing a permaculture model, the first thing you want to do after you've observed the land, they have been on the land for almost a year now, so they have observed it. But the next thing you want to schedule, of course, is all of your earthworks. You want to try to get all your earthworks out of the way, so then you can start your planting and have things grow in and all that type of stuff, and you're not coming back and continuing to disturb. There in zone 0, of course, he's going to have to do some house site prep. And depending on the house style he builds, he could do post and beam, he could do pier foundation, he could do concrete foundation, he could do slab if he wanted to. All of those are viable options in this region. But that watershed that comes down beside the house, it's not a heavy producer, so flooding's not going to be a big issue unless a tree comes down and blocks a stream and makes it cut into his house. But even that is just going to be a minor inconvenience, not something that's going to wash the house away. But we can see, with the way the land is in that situation, that there was a lot of erosion at some point. So there's a lot of fill. And that fill has caused that watershed, once you get past the house site, to kind of meander a bit. Take that into consideration along with the main stream, which is a pretty good producer. There's been some additional erosion and cutting as the creek's changed its paths over the centuries, probably. And it's created a low spot to the south side of the house seat area. And that low spot has created a swamp. So this isn't a natural swamp as much as it is a man-made swamp due to some of the erosion caused by whatever happened by the previous owners or the owners before them. So my recommendation was, since that's going to be right beside the house, a swamp is not something you want right by the house, because in Appalachia we can grow mosquitoes with landing lights. They can suck you dry in no time. So my recommendation was, if you're in here doing earthworks for the road and for the house seat, let's straighten up that small watershed and possibly use some of that erosion fill to realign that swamp. And literally all you'd have to do is kind of backfill a section, and it would cause the swamp water just to displace and kind of drain that whole area. So that would allow him to acquire a much larger zone 1 there in the front yard area. So there were some other minor earthwork suggestions I had in the homesteading zone, and I won't get into those. Those are detailed in the assessment, but I really want to kind of hit the high points with you guys. So the next area after earthworks was structures. And the house is a whole different discussion, so we'll leave that out of this video. But one of the recommendations I made for him, of course, was a barn. He's going to have livestock, he's going to have equipment, he's going to need those type of things. So naturally, a barn would come in handy. And because of his location of the house, this is one of the pros. So he does have that north-facing slope right behind the house, and it would be ideal for a really nice root cellar. So with minimal excavation work, it could even be done by hand, you could dig into the side of that hill, lay up some stone, put some good drainage in, of course, and have an incredible root cellar right there in Zone 1 that he can put a lot of his food stores in. Because of all the pastures he has, other structures I recommended that he would build would simply be structures that would be mobile. That permanent structures with that much acreage of pasture would actually be a tragedy because he can take advantage. He could fully embrace the Salatin model. He could do rotational intensive grazing with ruminants, followed behind with chickens. He could have pigs along the pasture edges that need to be maintained and cleared. There's just all kinds of things he could do. So my advice was don't build anything else permanent, make it all mobile. And that way it can be moved around to some of these key areas. Now for the Eastern Ridge Zone, there's a really nice man-made pond that kind of touches the Homestead Zone and reaches into the Eastern Ridge Zone. And so my thought was, okay, this is sanctuary. This is where the forest is the most untouched. It's the most isolated. And it's just got a beautiful, beautiful lay to it. Typical Appalachian hillside with a nice bench on top, commanding view at the top, beautiful hardwood trees all around. And the pond is really nice. There's a lot of water there, so there's a lot of production of water he can get out of that. The pond is stocked, so he has all kinds of opportunity for protein out of that pond. But that is the beginning. That's the start of his sanctuary. So my primary recommendation for him was just to fully embrace that. So while you had some heavy equipment in here doing some earthworks, very lightly, very gingerly, take that heavy equipment and make some trails, because that's the only downside of the Eastern Ridge. It's not easy to get to. There's no trails in place. It's not been timbered in centuries. So there's a lot of good trees, but there's no road access there. So up here on the ridge top, he's got a lot of land that's kind of plateaued up here. It's the same elevation as his house. And you can see here, this is his orchard. How many trees you say?
28 so far.
28 pear and apple, right?
Yes, all heirloom varieties.
Yeah, so southern heirloom varieties of pear and apple that he put in here, and really nice location for this, and really anxious to see, obviously he's anxious to see how this is going to produce here in the next couple years. So he's got some protective wraps on it. You know, obviously he realizes whitetail is going to be a challenge, but ready to take on that challenge. It's a really, really neat area here, right in the middle of the woods. And this, the lay of the land around here lays really nice and flat, and you can see sign of, you know, maybe 30, 40 years ago this was all grazable. And so now he's got these, you know, these little pockets of openings here for the one here for the orchard, and then you can see behind me here a small clearing that he's looking to do some other perennial work in. Yeah, that's a good size sapling.
That's 2 years old.
Is it?
This
Okay.
came from, they came from two different nurseries. This nursery is Mr. Hallman out of Newberry County, South Carolina, and he doesn't sell trees unless they are 2 years old.
Yeah.
But most of this orchard is Mr. David Vernon out of Reedsville, North Carolina, Century Farm Orchards.
Yeah.
And his are all 1 year old. He sells 1 year saplings, which is fine, but I tend to favor trees that are 2 years old if you're gonna be planting bare root. But it doesn't matter, they're gonna grow anyway.
Yeah. So the tourism zone on the west side, as I mentioned, has a house already where they're residing. And the plan, once they build the new house, of course, the off-grid house, they would move out of that house, and that house becomes vacant. And the way that house is situated at the front of the property, it's a perfect location for short-term rentals and Airbnb, especially if they're getting into providing horse sanctuary and horse boarding services, maybe even riding opportunities, because they have incredible trail systems. So I drew this zone around the entire top of the ridge, where Alan already has some great trails established. We spent some time riding around looking at them. They're well maintained. They make great opportunities. He and his wife already ride their horses on those trails, usually daily, they said, so they can enjoy that already. So to me, it's, hey man, let's just embrace that. Let's run with that. And just really make those trails improve where they can, maybe even make some cross trails, just to provide a lot of opportunity. So when people come to rent the house, whether they ride a horse or they walk, they've got all these great opportunities to just spend time in the woods. So the details I had in his assessment were more geared toward business side of that, but embracing what he already has in place and just enhancing it. All right, so we've done the loop, and so Alan's brought us back here to the house. He doesn't live in the barn here. Obviously, the horses do. And he has 2 horses, and what were the horses' names?
Gus and Leo.
Gus and Leo. Oh,
yeah.
They heard the names. He said that. Here it comes.
Yeah, he's ready for his evening feeding. Yeah, you are, aren't you, big buddy?
So Gus and Leo are quarter horses, which I think if you add those together, you get half a horse. But Gus is 1.5 horses. He's a big quarter horse.
Yeah, he's a big one.
Purdy. He's
a sweetheart.
Well, Alan, man, I really appreciate you letting me come spend the day and nose around your property and check out all the cool things you got going on. Man, you got some great potential with all this land, and it's really exciting to see what you've got. Just a raw canvas there to work on, but hearing your plans and what you've got, I'm jealous. I'd like to be 15 years younger too and be working on what you're working on.
Well, you know, perhaps some of your viewers will be looking into some Kentucky land before long.
Yeah.
I think Kentucky is a lot like West Virginia in the sense that it's an up-and-coming homesteading community for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I know people who have moved in around us since we moved in last year from California, from the Northeast, but not nearly as many that are moving to South Carolina where we came from.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are in the market for good homestead land, and Kentucky's got it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You know, if you guys don't know much about the difference between the two, obviously they're bordering states. But Kentucky is Appalachian hardwood forest, just like West Virginia is. So we're dealing with the exact same stuff that the Allen's dealing with here, as far as topography goes, vegetation, you know, the wildlife, all that type of stuff. So it's really neat to see a little bit better lay of the land than what we've got in West Virginia. But it's really neat to see what he's got going on here. Another thing you've got going on is you actually have a YouTube channel of your own, right?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, it's a pipe and pipe tobacco channel. That's what it started out as. Hardly anybody smokes pipes anymore. But I'm a history professor, and that's what I do. I smoke pipes.
Yeah.
But it's the Pipe Cottage is the name of it. And we talk a little bit about agrarianism and back to the land stuff on that channel, but mostly it's about pipe culture and the history and legacy of pipe smoking in this country.
Yeah.
And so if you're interested in that sort of thing, we talk about some history too, talk about various books and literature, a lot of different stuff.
Yeah. So if you like watching my channel, just know that when you go to Alan's channel, your IQ points are going to go up exponentially because it's much more cerebral than mine is.
No.
Much more educated.
No, well, you've got a lot more experience. And that's the difference between somebody who's 36 and somebody who's closer to 50.
Right, yeah.
There's a big amount of difference in those 13, 14 years.
Yeah, there's about 15 years of mistakes you got to catch up on.
Making mistakes and learning from them is highly valuable.
Exactly.
That's why I wanted you to come down here and help me to avoid a lot of them with these new ventures we have in mind.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to have your own perspective about what you want to do with your land.
Yeah.
It never hurts to have an outside perspective to either complement that vision or challenge it in a constructive way.
Yeah, that's good stuff. In case you guys are wondering, you may have picked up on it, but Alan is from the Bronx, New York City. You can,
fresh off the boot.
You can kind of tell by his dialect there. But no, a good Southern gentleman, and I really appreciate him letting Kelly and I come down and hang out today. And
you've got to move over.
Gus wants a little camera time. Actually, I think he wants dinner, doesn't he?
He does. It's feeding time, and he knows it.
All right. Well, property assessment is kind of something new. You know, we've here for the last couple of years, we've gone and looked at land to help people try to buy it. We've been their eyes when they can't set foot on it directly. But realizing that once people have, or they're not quite sure how to handle their Appalachian property, that the 23 years of experience I have with this piece of land, I can definitely lean in and give you some advice on what not to do and maybe share some things what to do. So if you're interested in a property assessment from us, I'm going to put a link down below to our website that talks about that specific service. We will travel outside of the state of West Virginia. I would like to keep it in the Appalachian region, East Coast primarily. When we get West Coast, then I really don't know what I'm doing. But for travel and another fee, of course, we'd be delighted to come out and just share our knowledge and be able to see what you're working with. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. Well, comment below if you found this property assessment valuable. If we do any more of these, if you find value in the video, just sharing the details of the land. This is kind of the first go, so the video may be a little bumpy with all my B-roll footage, but we just had a great time capturing as much information about this land as possible. Well, I pray y'all have a great week. Take care.